I hope everyone is doing well this morning. It's good to be here. It's good to be together, looking at the Word of God, which is paramount because that's what God has for us, is His Word. We are in the book of 1 Kings, and we're going to finish chapter 10. We are essentially done with that chapter. And up until this point in Kings, we see Solomon become king. He is very wise in his youth, and he becomes an astoundingly great king. He raises Israel up. God actually does all that, and everyone recognizes that God is the one behind everything that's happening for Israel at this point. And in chapter 10, it kind of shows the pinnacle of everything. It shows all the gold that he's amassing, all of these riches that he's amassing. He has this navy that is, I think it's probably more run by Hiram. I think Hiram has a lot more, he has a lot more experience with this thing. We know that his sailors are the ones that are helping do all this for Israel. And I think we left off with, how much gold there was that he was getting every year. It was, in today's money, $1.5 billion, whatever. However, I'm sure we all got something different from that. But that was a conservative measurement. And that amount of money back then would have been, of course, a lot more than that. Way, way, way more than that. Okay, so before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Holy Father, we are thankful, Lord, that you have asked us to be here this day, that you have given us your word, and that for us it is a great treasure for our hearts. And we hope and pray that it draws us nearer to you, and we hope and pray all things we do today would be in accordance with your will. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, so my final question about chapter 10 was based on all these things that we now see, all these material things that Israel has amassed through this wise king. He's famous throughout the land. He's even more wise than all of those wise people in the east. And the fame of God, Jehovah God himself, is being raised up to the world, at least within that region. What was the general understanding about Jehovah to the world at large, was my question. I think we spoke a little bit about this. Did they consider, I think Aaron finished out the whole talk saying that the people feared God. They feared God because of what he had done for them. But did they consider God to be the only true and living God, is my question. No. Okay. Does that ever happen in the Old Testament? With Israel, yes. But with the rest of the world, we kind of see this world of gods. And, one God might at some time be stronger than another God. And I think I brought it up last time that we see that happen in Daniel's time, where we see Nebuchadnezzar gradually looking at God going, wow, this God is a great God. He sees what he does with the, saving his people and all this. And, but even with all of that, he still ends up having to be chastised by God later because he still believed in the other gods. Okay?
Well, David believed only in God.
Okay.
And then later Hezekiah and Josiah, there were a few.
There were a few kings, yes. Yes, there were some kings. There were some good kings after David. And I don't remember how Barry ferreted it out, but I don't know how if we would consider Solomon a good king or a bad king, because he has these great, like so many other people, he has this great beginning, and then here we're going to get to chapter 11, and he's going to break our hearts, right? Because all of these good things have been happening, and that whole bright, shiny thing is going to get a little tainted, if not a lot tainted. And I think it brings up a lot of questions for us as well. Yes, Lisa.
A lot of those things were considered good, made errors when they got further on. They're not even
Okay.
very old. Hezekiah showed the Babylonian envoys all the treasure, and wasn't really giving God good glory for all of that. And God said all the things that be taken away from him. And Josiah was told not to go against the Egyptians, and he lost his life in doing that. He didn't pay attention. So they were still fallible, and David was fallible as well. But even the good kings they weren't quite as devoted as David.
Okay. So even all the kings that were considered good make errors in their judgment. And I think that speaks a lot to what Jesus eventually brings forward in the message from God, that, you're not going to do this on your own. Aaron.
We should try to define what it means to be good. It doesn't mean flawless and perfect. It doesn't mean a king that doesn't make mistakes. But what we recognize about David is his humility and his repentance when he does make mistakes. That's as good as we can get. When Christ is the perfect pattern that we're all to follow, that we all fall short of.
Okay. That's it. Yeah.
I mean,
And
Solomon's going to make mistakes, and so do we. And every king did.
And again, this is what Jesus manifests about God that people didn't quite understand. People kept trying to do it on their own. Oh, I'll perform, and that, goodness against God and make him do things for me. I will be rich because of it. And people think that today even. Well, if you just believe in God, he will bless you with all these things. And it doesn't say that anywhere in the scriptures. Betty and then Tom.
Christ was the only one that was perfect.
Okay, Christ.
They had done the service.
Okay, yes. Jesus was the only perfect one. We're going to get into that today in the sermon, right? Jesus was the only perfect king. He didn't mess up anything. The revelation that he brings forward, that all the things that he reveals about God, it just blows people away. Even today, it should. I'm going to talk about that later, but that is where the power of God is found. Even though we know it, we just grow up knowing that. Tom?
Yeah, so going to what Aaron was saying, I don't think there's any evidence that Solomon repented of his sin. So that's unlike David. So by that definition, I guess we should say that Solomon was not a good king.
Okay. Solomon did not repent. There's no,
It's not recorded.
yeah, it's not recorded. No. And more than that, I think we're going to see in chapter 11 that will be supported. That thought that Solomon got of a mind where he was more concerned about himself, I'm not saying he stopped loving God, but he didn't choose God over everything else. He thought he could divide things up, categorize, however he thought he could do this. And again, there's an implication there for us, that this is how we can drift away from God. When, We're going to put God up there with everybody else, or down there with everybody else. Betty?
Well, later on, I can't read the scripture off the top of my head, but Solomon does recognize that everything is vanity, because vanity, all is vanity. So at some point in time, you realize riches, gold, women, all of that is not a thing. You realize that God is, God, or you opinion or not, but you recognize it.
Okay. Ida?
I think, we need, I don't know, in my mind, we need to have different, I don't know quite how to say it, but yes, people are good in God's eyes, are bad in God's eyes. But also, there's the real sense of them being kings in a physical world and having to make decisions and stuff like that. And are they good or are they bad? Well, a really bad example was Pharaoh during the time of the Exodus, because he didn't care what happened to his people. You know, we don't always think about that, but Egyptians went through a lot, right? Because the 12 plagues, they didn't, most of them didn't bother the Israelites. They bothered the Egyptians. And Pharaoh didn't care. He wanted his way. Whereas you've got Solomon, who I concur with what Tom said. We don't see any sense that he repented, but his people lived a good life. But how long did they live that good life? Because as soon as the son came to the throne, they were already being hit with this massive inflation. And we only have a little bit of inflation now, and we complain. And, you know, so how far-reaching were his policies? Well, you needed somebody just as wise as Solomon after Solomon to make sure everything was,
Okay.
you know, going okay. So, you know, they could be good in one way, but kind of bad in another way.
Yeah, we had talked about that, how Solomon's wisdom was a very secular wisdom, and that's why we see him making alliances and doing all these things. And that makes sense, that he was still wise in that sense. And so his concern was for his people, unlike the Pharaoh of old, who didn't care. That's a good point. So that's a good point, that you temper that idea of good or bad and say, well, he still cared about his people. And he likely still cared a measure about Jehovah God. But we'll see in chapter 11 that there's a cutoff point for God, right? And we know about this, that there's a cutoff point where he has to do something. He has to pass a certain judgment, whatever that might be. Steve, did you have your hand up? Yeah, I would agree with that a person who would say all is vanity is somebody who's definitely like looking from the outside in and just saying, this is, you know, and I'm assuming he's considering the specter of death that hovers over everybody, right? And sees that it doesn't matter how many things you do, what good is all of it, because you're going to leave the earth anyway. So I think, I don't know, I think that's what you're saying. So we're going to see some of that in this next chapter. Anybody else got anything to add? Okay, let's head to chapter 11. Now, the way it reads is like, all these things happen, and then Solomon messes up. But I would inject my own thought here that I think this was not all of a sudden, right? I mean, it reads from the beginning of his reign that he marries the Egyptian, and there's these places of worship that weren't supposed to be there, and yet we see God dealing kindly with Israel and with Solomon, and but there's a point, I think this is just what it is. It's just that God just says, okay, I can't continue with this covenant with you because you're breaking it. You're continually breaking it. That is just my own thought. So let's read verses 1 through 13. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. So it's their fault. So, for when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord, his God, as the heart of David, his father, had been. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus he died for all his foreign wives. He did for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after gods. But he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. So the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father, David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So basically, Solomon has too many wives that are influencing him into idolatry, and he is not wholly devoted to God. So God tells him that the kingdom will be torn away from him. So Barry asks that we look in Deuteronomy 17, 16 through 17, and list all the ways that Solomon had violated God's laws for kings. Just look at that really quick. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause a people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord had said to you, you shall never again return that way. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he increase silver and gold for himself. So What is Barry asking here? What sort of things did Solomon do that he wasn't supposed to do? And I know we've already talked about this. What did he do? He did all those things, didn't he? All those things. He just went ahead and did them. And again, it really is tough to think about this because he has this great wisdom. And as it was pointed out to me, it's just this secular way of doing things. He makes all these alliances. He understands how to make the nation great. And unfortunately, it ends up pulling him away from God. We have this association with Egypt, and this is a very strange thing. This whole political thing is really weird that we're going to get into with Egypt. But Ida.
I do think he also had spiritual wisdom. He just chose
Okay.
which wisdom he was going to follow.
Okay.
Just, I hope this isn't too far off the subject, but a different perspective was given to me one time when I was teaching the second and third graders. And we were talking about this, where he had all these wives and all these porcupines. And this one little boy raised his hand and he said, I don't think any of those women were very happy. And, you know, we think of these evil women that turned Solomon away. And yet the reality of it is none of them had a marriage, you know, that I believe. They never had a marriage that they would have wanted to have. And that's sad. And that was sad for Solomon.
Okay, so a young person makes the claim that these wives were probably not happy. Well, yeah, if you're one of 1,000 to begin with, you know, on top of the fact that this is probably an arranged thing, you really didn't have a lot of say in it. It's it's an alliance of nations. And it may be that Solomon just thought, you know, the least I can do is let these wives worship their God. And that, you know, I don't know if that was something he felt was a respectful thing to do, considering, you know, we have an alliance. I have an alliance with this wife, you know, her father, who is a king, and they believe in this ex-god, whatever it might be, so I'm going to make concessions on that. And what does that tell us? I mean, ultimately, it is detrimental to his own faith, is my thinking. Okay, so, and that brings this next question up. What principles might we learn for our lives today from Solomon's mistakes? So Solomon does all these things. He's thinking, you know, this is going to help the nation. This is going to help all of our alliances. And then he falls into the trap of idolatry. So what do we learn from that? Did we learn anything? Okay.
Well, we learn not to worship anything but God. And we learn not to try to amass great wealth.
Okay. Don't worship anything other than God. Okay.
Nothing.
All right. I want to call you David. I don't know why. I know that's your name.
That is my name.
David.
Evil company corrupts good morals.
Okay, there you go.
And, you know, there's, again, God gave, you know, law to his people because he loves his people and wants the best for them. We have to remember and remind ourselves that that's why we have this instruction, is so that we can live a full and prosperous and joyful life. And part of that is, you know, finding people that level, spiritually at the top of that list. And, a spouse, a wife, people that you are being intimate with have influence over you. And so you want to join yourself with someone that's going to help you get to where you want to go.
That was one of my first thoughts, was the New Testament teaching of that. You can be unequally yoked with somebody, an evil companion. Yes, Ida?
Thinking about wealth and different things like that, and would instead of amassing horses, would that count as too many cars today? But
Good point.
what I was thinking of is wealth, all these things are blessings from God.
That's right.
And you don't have to go very far out our front door to find people that have a lot less than we do.
That's right.
And so we could be thought of as amassing wealth, which we didn't.
That's right.
But we need to look at these as blessings from God and use them as He would see fit, and to have a grateful heart instead of just having them. Remember that Jesus said it's not the wealth that's the root of all evil; it's the love of money that's
Okay. All right, good point. Yeah, I think all those things are part of a Christian walk, is realizing we need God, how much we actually need God every single day when we wake up until we go to sleep. And the focus being on God. And the issues that Solomon reveals is that even with all these things, you don't get to God through things. And God has an issue when we start putting things, and we've heard this sermon many, many times, because it's easy for us, because we are wealthy. I agree. We just go to the store and, that's our hunting and gathering, it's so simple. It's simple. We have flushing toilets and soft beds and that sort of thing. We are very wealthy in that sense. And when all these things get in the way of our perception of God and our respect of God, our fear, if you want to say that, then it becomes an issue. And I think that's the lesson for me when I look at Solomon, even with all that he had and God had blessed him with. He kind of lost his way, and that's for all of us to think about. Lisa?
when you're honoring those things, and they're not given by God, who's creator of everything in the universe, and has blessed you so mightily, you're going to be basing yourself down below the level of those things that you're worshiping. So you're putting yourself, a created being by God, underneath these things. So the level of your value, in human terms, becomes debased. And Solomon utterly debased himself under these foreign gods, these foreign women. And it was his choice and his decision. And he, you can blame it on all the influence in the world. He had been given everything, every gift God could give him. And then to, basically take it and say, well, it's not worth this. And these earthly created things that were, seen as territorial gods, when you have the God of all heaven
Right.
to worship and to bless.
So that's a terrible thought and a great thought. That when we put these things before God, we debase ourselves. We debase God, but we also debase
I would say God
ourselves.
cannot be debased.
But in our own minds, we are making him less than those things. Yeah, second or equal to something, and there is nothing equal to God. Good point. Good point. And it's a good way of thinking about it to keep us away from that. I don't want to make myself, I was going to say moron. I don't think that's the right word. I think just somebody who's debased. I don't want to be that person. I want to look at God. That's where I want to look. Aaron.
I think that's just a really profound statement that whenever you look up to, you're putting yourself below.
Does that happen a lot today? Are there a lot of humans that I think, when we say there are humans that are put up higher than maybe where they should be above God? Yes, absolutely. And a lot of them have good intent, some of them not. It could be political, it could be just somebody who's really smart. Some people who's considered they have genius. Maybe they're speaking about something that's just so profound, and then all of a sudden they become a new God in a sense. In other words, they are regarded more highly than God himself. And that's an easy trap to fall into today with all the information we have at our disposal. I don't remember how many years of YouTube videos are uploaded every day, but it was some kind of crazy number. I think that was Scott that talked about that. It's crazy. Yes. Okay.
Okay, I've lost my thought.
It'll come back.
Oh, in
See?
the New Testament somewhere, I don't know what it is, it says, not many wise will choose Jesus. Not many wise.
Not many wise will choose.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. I don't know where that is, but I would assume that what he was saying is you may consider them to be wise. And there were, we'll get into that today. We're going to be studying from John chapter 1. There were a lot of people who were wise in that day, who proved themselves not to be very wise at all. Anybody else? Okay, so check a Bible dictionary. Barry asked that we check the Bible dictionary and find out what you can about worship to Ashtaroth, Chemosh, and Molech or Moloch or Milcom. When I looked into it, it was like, okay, these guys are like, you can go to one region and it would be called something, but it would kind of assimilate this other God characteristic. It gets crazy. It's a rabbit hole. But there are some basic things about their worship that is pretty much shared among them. So what did anybody get about Ashtaroth? She's a goddess, right? Yeah? Yes? Betty?
Goddess of love and fertility, worshipped at fire and fire.
Okay. All right. And here's Tyre. Okay. When I think of Tyre, who are we thinking of when we hear Tyre? Hiram, right? So it behooves, I'm making the assumption, it behooves Solomon to make an allowance for this, because this is, after all, a nation that is helping them out exceedingly for materials and wealth. Anybody else have anything for Ashtaroth?
she was the goddess of fertility,
Yes.
love, and fertility, and war.
Yes. She was a warrioress in some places. Again, it depends on different regions. Some people add things to it. There were some places where she would bifurcate, and I just learned that word. I'm not even sure I'm using it correctly, but she would take on male and female attributes. She was associated with Baal in some areas. Yes, Lisa.
She was kind of an incorporation of the goddesses
Yes.
in different forms, different goddesses. She was kind of the encapsulation of all
Yeah.
So, very powerful.
The head god, if you will, goddess, if you will. Yeah, so this was, and of course, all these things are happening. The belief is bad enough, but then the worship itself is debauchery and all kinds of terrible things I don't want to talk about. Okay, what about Shemos,
God of war.
god of war? Okay. Yeah, I had down that he was known as the destroyer or subduer. So this was the god you would pray to if you were going to war, if you wanted to conquer somebody, that kind of thing. You would worship them.
My dictionary says also identified as Baal,
Yeah,
Baal
yeah.
is above, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Mars and Saturn.
Yeah, they all start, Baal and Beelzebub and all these gods, they kind of start migrating into each other's beliefs. Betty?
I had them as God of Moabites, who sacrificed their children as burnt offerings was customary.
Yes. So it wasn't unusual to sacrifice children to this god. And a lot of these gods, the worship to these gods just started including all these sexual perversions and these weirdness. It's like, what? Okay. So it was just this, these gods are just about the physical things. And they live in the spiritual realm or whatever. I'm not sure, but they were all about just the physicalness. And I think, unfortunately, this is what happens with the view of Jehovah, and this is why I brought that up. The view of Jehovah is he's just another one of these gods. And we can't do that. We can't put him anywhere except where he needs to be. Molech or Moloch,
Fire God.
fire god.
The one that the firstborn was sacrificed to.
Okay. Yeah, this one was definitely heavy into child sacrifice. This was one where a couple of ways that it's described. One was they were caused to pass through the fire, although some people think that they were sacrificed first and then they were burned. Either way, I don't know. It was horrible. It was a horrible practice, and this was, this to me indicates the fall of the mind of people. They just didn't, everybody knew who God was in the beginning, but this is after many, many years, and we see this degradation of mankind seeking a God and making up a God in their own mind. Okay, anybody want to add anything to this? There's nothing good about any of this. This is horrible stuff. Okay, so but I think the point here is that these are the kinds of things that Solomon was allowing. Yes, Ida.
Just not to be hypocritical, this is awful, and they deserve judgment. But we sacrifice our infants to the same things now, to pleasure and convenience.
Okay, so I think your point, Ida's point is, we do a lot of things today that are very similar to infants and younger,
Or even if they were,
even teenagers. Yeah, okay. We ignore our children. Is that what you mean? We can,
well, and also what Betty just was saying about, we give up the unborn.
give up the unborn. And that,
And why else would you have most of those pregnancies if we weren't worshiping pleasure?
okay. Yeah, I think that's a comment to society as we're seeing it today. I don't know how much has changed over the years. I think it has changed in my lifetime, anyway. Especially, of course, with the acceptance of it, and maybe even the encouragement of a lot of it. So, I like to always cite that first murder that happened and the blood calling for justice to God from the earth. And I don't know what that sound is like today with God, what he's hearing up there. It's kind of frightful to think about that. All we can do is focus on God, though. That's all we can do. Okay. Anything else? Betty?
And one more thing that I thought was horrible, interesting, horrible. Over in 2 Kings 3:27, the king of Moab took his eldest son and offered him as a burnt offering. He couldn't break through to the enemy. And this was
Yeah.
take your son.
Take your son. Yeah. And this is that degradation of the mind. Yeah. He takes his son. He thinks that if he sacrifices his son to his God, he will get a reward. We hear Christian preaching saying these exact same things almost. They don't ask you to sacrifice your sons and daughters, but the reward is physical. And, I would just advise anybody, if you hear this faux Christianity talk about gaining wealth, run away. Don't listen, because that's not what Jesus brought. That's not what God ever intended for us. Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're going to read this next section. 14 through 25. Let's see, I think it's over here. Okay. 14 through 25. Then the Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, and I just want us to kind of think about what's happening here in this sense, because it reads like Solomon disobeyed God, and then this happened. And I believe that's how it happened. There was a point where God said, okay, I'm done. I'm not. My patience is up. This was a gradual thing in my mind that Solomon does, and then there's a cutoff point. I think it probably wasn't not long after he built his house, the temple and his house, and then the Millo and these other things, because of the Jeroboam component. Then the Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal line in Edom, and a lot of this you can find in Samuel chapter 8, where David is just brutal in what he does. At the hand of his generals. It came about when David was in Edom that Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain and had struck down every male in Edom. There's like 18,000 that died there in the Valley of Salt. For Joab and all Israel stayed there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. That Hadad fled to Egypt. So here's this strange politics, because Solomon has association. He's married to one of Pharaoh's daughters, right? But Egypt is harboring the enemies of Israel. So I don't know how this worked, but it somehow just did. He fled to Egypt and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him, while Hadad was a young boy. They arose from Midian and came to Paran, and they took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him food and gave him land. Now Hadad found great favor before Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Taphanes, the queen. The sister of Taphanes bore his son Genubath, whom Taphanes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Send me away, that I may go to my own country." Then Pharaoh said to him, "But what have you lacked with me, that behold, you are seeking to go to your own country?" And he answered, "Nothing. Nevertheless, you must surely let me go." So this is happening after David died. So this is early on in Solomon's reign. God also raised another adversary to him, Rezon, the son of Eladiah, who had fled from his lord, Hadadezer, king of Zobah. He gathered men to himself and became a leader of a marauding band after David slew them of Zobah. And they went to Damascus, so this is in the northern region, and stayed there and reigned in Damascus. So he was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon, along with the evil that Hadad did. And he abhorred Israel and reigned over Aram. Now, so even though there's peace in the region, it's a general peace. There are people that don't like Solomon and that sort of thing. Then, I'm sorry, that we're gonna end it there. So then we're gonna end it there. We'll pick up there and get into this fall, if you will, from grace for Solomon. Thank you.